So one thing I've learned, Russell, over the years and working with my real estate coach is the emphasis on the math, the emphasis on the analysis, factoring in, especially the way that I do it, because I've been taught to do it in a way that 99% of the real estate investors aren't taught this way. And because we look at budgeted or unseen costs, which we know are going to take place, which we factor in our analysis when we do the analysis, they may not be actual expenses immediately, but we know that they're going to happen. So we budget for them all the time. And if it doesn't meet that criteria, we just pass. So what have you seen when it comes to, well, you talked about this a little bit with the newbies where they're just buying stuff just because somebody said it's a good deal or whatever, but what have you seen in the last 13, 15 years with the emphasis on the math, the analysis? Has it changed? Is there more emphasis now than it used to be? And how do people approach it nowadays?
Yeah, and I can tell firsthand experience about this hard lesson learned is, when I bought my properties starting 15 years ago, 15 years ago, when I bought them, they were 40 years old. Fast forward 15 years, they're now 50, 55, coming on 60 years old. And, rental housing deteriorates. Tenants don't treat it as nice. Unfortunate to say, tenants don't treat it as nice if it was their home. Unfortunate to say, some do. Absolutely got tenants that are fantastic. Yeah. They're like gold, and I treat them like gold, and we'll always have a wonderful relationship. But sometimes people just don't actually take a look at, hot water tanks. How long do they last? Furnaces, roofs, doors, windows. Real life story. A story I bought, the mistake I made, and I talked earlier about, was the ego getting involved, right? I suffered, I still sometimes suffer from short man syndrome. And as a short man, sometimes the short men that suffer from short man syndrome, we have to be like the loudest dog on the park, and we have to bark louder than everybody else. So we have to prove our self-worth, and we have to do more than everybody else, and we have to, just don't ever let things go. But that led me to buying in this one complex, which I bought one, and in my infinite wisdom, I ended up buying 9 of them in the same complex. And, fast forward 12, 13 years later, we get hit with a $36,000 special assessment times 9. Yeah. Right? So for those of you, math time, put that into your calculator. Yeah. And it did not cash flow that long over that period of time. So it was challenging. It was struggle. It was a big struggle to come up with that much money, and they gave a little bit of time to pay it off. But it was tough. I had to sell some things and had to take losses. I actually, on a portfolio of real estate, I actually had to write a check to my lawyer to sell the property. Something that I owned for almost 14, 15 years. Wow. I had to bring a check to closing in order for it to close. So I understand all too well that you need to factor in those things. So the lesson learned, if I went back 15 years, is when the cash flow was only saying maybe $100 or $125, they needed to be $300, $400, $500, $600 at that time in order to factor in all the budgetary items I needed to do for the roofs, the windows, the doors, the furnaces, the carpet. Everything had to be replaced.
Yeah. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about how I analyze it, which I was taught this way. And when I say this to other real estate investors, they're just like, you're insane. Like, why? You're never going to find anything that cash flows. And you know what? Everything cash flows, just a matter of how much money you have to put into it. Because basically, from the purchase price, if you're able to get the rent, it's going to cash flow. And everyone says, oh, it's going to be negative cash flow. But no, they're just looking at it wrong, because they're paying the bank first, because basically, from the income versus just the basic expenses of the taxes, the insurance, those things, not the operational, but those things, whatever's left over is usually positive, and that means it cash flows. Yep. Now there's 2 people to pay, you and the bank. Yep. Who do you love more? So then you figure out, okay, well, if I love
depends who screams louder.
If I love me more, that means I'm going to factor in how much my profit first, and then whatever's left over is to pay the bank. But so generally triplexes or less, it's very difficult to find anything that's really, without sinking a lot of money, without having a small ROI. that really doesn't justifies putting that much money into it. Factor typically 12.5% vacancy per year. It may not be vacant this year, may not be vacant next year, but look what's going on in the economy right now. And people sitting with vacant. I've known guys from the group that we're go to on Wednesday, they've sitting on not just 1, 2, but some of them 10, 20, 30 properties vacant for not just 1 month, but 2, 3, 4 months at a time. Yep. So if you're not factoring it in, now, like I said, you plan for the worst, but you hope for the best,
Absolutely.
Right? But you're planning for the worst. You're planning for that vacancy. And repairs and maintenance, $2,000, $2,500 per unit per year.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you're going to spend it, but when that roof goes, or you have that special assessment, or something comes up, you've already budgeted that money and it's sitting there waiting for this expense to happen. And you're not trying to come up with money to close the deal at the end of the term, at the end of the sale, right?
Yeah, at RAIN, the CEO, Patrick Francie, teaches, and he calls it the phase 2, essentially a phase 2 property analysis. After you do the cash flow pro forma, then you take a look at the ages of every of the mechanicals, and you factor in when it's going to be replaced and how much money has to be set aside now to do that. Because having rental properties, when you have the money in the bank and when a hot water tank goes, it's okay, good. I planned for it, right? So those are all good news scenarios.
Excellent. So what do you see with regards to people picking properties? What are they focusing on? Do you see a lot of mistakes being made with regards to selecting the property?
Well, it's selection of property is actually one of those. It's a hard one to really pinpoint, but a lot of people don't do the research. Back to the research. So I think that the first thing you need to do is you need to do some kind of background economic research in an area. And to keep it, I could go on for hours on this. And if you're interested, Don Campbell has a wonderful book called Real Estate Investing in Canada. That's a fantastic book to pick up. But I highly recommend that you really look at the people, if you will. The people, are they moving in more than they're moving out? Are the people working? Right, so is unemployment low? And if the people that are working, is their wages growing or declining? Really, between those three is a really good starting point. And then after that, you start getting into research in certain neighborhoods and certain areas and tenant profiles and the demographics and the types of properties. One of the things that I've now divesting a lot of my older properties, and I'm actually getting into brand new construction properties. Where brand new, where you're getting it top to bottom, everything built from brand new with tenant in mind. So we're actually have a tenant spec where we will put in all the right soundproofing, all the right parking, everything. So it's built for tenant-friendly properties, and you actually get a new home warranty. And suited houses, and as just all one legal? Of them, all legal, all 100%. They're actually designed right from the ground up with a tenant in mind, and they're cash flowing really well. It's a little bit tighter than if you bought a resale, but the one thing that people don't factor in is if you buy a resale that's 30 years old, you're going to have to replace all those mechanicals. On a brand new property, typically, if you know your builder well, which we do our research on our builders very well, if we know them well, you may not be putting any capital into that project and those houses for a long period of time. And I'm actually taking a step forward is every 5 to 7 years, I'm actually selling my portfolio and getting new inventory. Right. And just keep all the inventory fresh, keep it churning, and potentially not have to have that large capital expenditure that I talked about earlier.
Do you find a lot of, especially newer investors, focus more on price than anything else?
Yeah, price is probably the number one thing. And you said something earlier, and I want to add to it, is price is what you pay, value is what you get.
That's right.
And you can get cheap, and cheap is cheap, and I mentioned that earlier. And don't just focus. It's just one variable to the equation. It's an important variable. Don't get me wrong. I want to get something of value at the least amount of money. But at the same time, am I also willing to pay maybe a premium to have less tenant turnover, a premium to have less tenant issues, a premium to pay less in maintenance on a long-term basis? Now, here's the thing people don't think about is when you're actually buying it up front, maybe you pay a little bit of a premium, the bank actually finances like 80% of that. Yeah. It's not cash out of your pocket, but every dollar you put in after the fact to put a roof, a windows, doors, furnace is 100% coming out of your pocket or for somewhere else.
So
right?
what kind of warranties are you guys getting on these new?
Well, the new home warranty changes. We offer there's 1 year from the builder, bumper to bumper.
Okay.
A lot with that, we actually some of our builders offer an extra year or two on that, and then things start changing as the year goes on. I think they're 5 year prorated up to 5 years.
Nice.
Yeah.
So there's a good chance you don't have to invest a lot,
Potentially,
or if any.
Yep, absolutely. Or you're prepared for
Or
it.
just cosmetics.
Cosmetics. A lot of you will always have operation tenant turnover costs, always. But potentially a new roof will be covered for under warranty. You might not have to pay for that if you're only going to own it for 5 to 7 years, and then just keep churning new inventory.
Excellent. Which is something I do in the rent-own business,
Yep.
is just keep churning inventory over and over and over, and not having those, and pushing the costs onto the tenant buyer, which, let's face it, been doing rent-own a long time. Tenant buyers love new.
Yep.
They love the newer the better.
Yep.
So they don't want to have to shell out that kind of money for potential repairs and maintenance, because you're pushing it all on them.
Yeah. Well, if you think about it, so you still want to be a long-term holder.
Yeah.
Let's say you still want to hold your portfolio for 20 years. So every 5 years, you just turn your portfolio over, and you never have anything more older than a 5-year old property. But you still hold a portfolio for property for 20 years.